Hi, welcome to another session here on the Art of Meditation Global Summit. My name is Fleet Mall. I'm your co-host for this session, and I'm really thrilled to be here today with longtime friend and colleague, Roshi Melissa Blacker. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here with you, Fleet.
Well, it's really great to have you here on our day focused on Zen. And we have some, I've practiced in some ways, I really encourage people to go really deeply into one tradition. Somehow my karma took me into two traditions. So I've been practicing both the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and the Zen tradition for a long time. And our Zen lineages are pretty close. I think we're like cousins in that regard. Yeah. So it's great to be with you today. So I'll share a bit of your background and then we'll get started, okay? Okay. So Melissa Myozen Blacker Roshi is a Soto Zen priest and a Dharma heir to James Myoen Ford Roshi in two lineages, and ordained Soto transmission through Jiu Kennett Roshi, and a lay koan teaching lineage through John Trant Roshi. Along with her husband, David Dayan Rinnick Roshi, she is a resident teacher at Boundless Way Zen Temple in Worcester, Massachusetts. She holds degrees in anthropology, music, and counseling psychology. From 1992 to 2012, Roshi was a teacher and director of programs at the Center for Mindfulness, founded by John Kabat-Zinn. Her writing appears in a number of collections, including Best Buddhist Writing and The Hidden Lamp, and she is co-editor of the book of Mu, Essential Writings on Zen's Most Important Koan. Her writing also appears in various Buddhist magazines, including Shambhala Sun, Lion's Roar, and Buddha Dharma. Well, the most important thing is that I get Worcester right. I'm not native to Massachusetts.
Very close. No. Yeah. Well, it depends on
Worcester,
whether you're
something like
native of Worcester or I'm an immigrant, so I call it Worcester.
Yeah. Okay. Worcester.
But anyway, close enough.
All right. Good. So, Roshi, given your depth of teaching experience, both teaching experience and in training teachers, both in the kind of mainstream secular mindfulness tradition, especially MBSR, in your role with John Kabat-Zinn's organization that was then at the University of Massachusetts, and your longtime experience as a teacher and priest in the Zen tradition, the Soto Zen tradition. I'm wondering if you could just talk about maybe some of the similarities and if any distinctions between mindfulness as we see it kind of in this general secular mainstream mindfulness tradition and Zen.
Sure. That's always an interesting question. I get asked this a lot, and my answer is always a little bit different, whatever seems to be coming up in the moment around it. I feel so lucky to have had those 20 years of training and teaching in secular mindfulness. A lot of that teaching and training got absorbed into my Zen practice. When I first met John Kabat-Zinn, I was already a Zen practitioner, and then became a Zen teacher while I was becoming a mindfulness teacher. So I experienced training from both sides. And for me, I have a kind of a Venn diagram with a V around the two different disciplines of secular mindfulness and Zen Buddhist practices. And we have trained teachers in Zen Buddhism, and I've given transmission to a few people, still training students in how to give talks, how to work with individual students, how to teach the very same kinds of practices that we really did teach, I taught in MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. So the places where there isn't an overlap fascinate me. And I think one of the main places is from the word secular. There's a lot of controversy in the greater mindfulness world, which now is everywhere and very diverse, about the use of the word secular, because there is a feeling of spirituality to the way some people teach mindfulness. Not everybody. For some people, it's more of a psychological intervention than it is a spiritual practice. But because when I first met John, I was already a Zen Buddhist, I couldn't help but bring that aspect of things into my mindfulness teaching. So for me, it was always kind of going back and forth and then consolidating. Any practice of paying attention to whatever's happening in the present moment and learning not to preference one experience over another has a spiritual aspect to it. So for me, that's the way I always taught mindfulness. But of course, Zen Buddhism, for me too, and there's controversy in the Zen world about this, is a religion. It comes with a set of inherited traditions, practices, and I'm not a strict adherent of the religious aspects of Zen, but I'm also not on the other side either. We haven't abandoned all those things. We hope to make use of what we love.
Well, it's really interesting how we use language, because language has a lot of power. My first teacher, Chogyam Rinpoche, talked about, he developed Shambhala training as kind of a secular spirituality. So for him, secular didn't mean non-spiritual, right? And I've heard Saki Santarelli talk about that from his viewpoint, MBSR was not non-spiritual. And so some people have gravitated toward the term mainstream, and sometimes I use that to describe the mindfulness movement. But I think it's fair to say, as you said, within that mainstream mindfulness movement, there are some with more of a spiritual orientation and some with less of a spiritual orientation. And it's really interesting in Zen that Zen practice has a lot to do with experiencing the formless realm, if you will, in some way or another. And also is, sometimes talked about being outside the text or something. It's more based on direct experience. And at the same time, traditional Zen has a lot of forms.
That's right. Especially
has a lot of forms, and they're I think we modern folks tend to want to be less attached to the forms, but some of the forms are quite beautiful, and they can really be imbued with the view of practice. I mean, in Zen, bowing practice seems to be one that is really just, it really is a practice. And so it's an interesting dance between the form and the formless, and tradition and non-traditional approaches and so forth. So, yeah. So I wonder.
I found when I was teaching mindfulness that I missed the Zen forms because of that very thing. There's sort of a way that bowing is a great example. The body is imbued with the activity of bending forward or touching the ground, lifting hands above the head. There's it really is like a yoga practice of surrender. And that's how I've always taught the forms. And people do rebel against them. People really don't like them. But I missed them because there was a container that was created, I felt, in Zen practice. There is a container, and I just feel so at ease in that, sinking into the forms as practice, as you're saying, Fleet.
Well, actually, I'll never forget my senior priest ordination that was done by Roshi John Halifax and Roshi Enkyo Pat O'Hara at Upaya, and it was done. I think the ceremony started at midnight or something, and it was a full moon night. And we very traditional approach to the whole thing, and really beautifully held by the priests there. And it was so, at a moment I just had this flash of, it was so timeless. And I felt just like I was connected to several thousand years of this unbroken lineage. And we could have been in China 1,500 years earlier or something, or wherever. And there was this timelessness. And so I think we do work with the interplay of form and formlessness, but forms can be, maybe properly held, imbued with the view of the Dharma, with the teachings, with the insights, with the feeling of liberation, the feeling of awakening.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Saki Santarelli, who was my foremost trainer. John got me started, but he was the person who really hung in with me while I was training to be a teacher, and was my direct supervisor. And his sense of things came from his own Sufi background,
right?
Which, the way to understand everything that arises is as an emanation of God in some way. So even though as a Zen Buddhist, I don't have theistic orientation, I still feel like that sense you had of everything disappearing, time and space, and suddenly here we are with all our ancestors. This is a way that we enter the non-dual, the world of thusness. And so that is the opportunity. And I felt that again and again when I was teaching MBSR, that there were moments in those classes where everything would open in the same way. And there's a very clear form in MBSR. That's the other thing. Talk about forms. There, you could compare Zen and MBSR, which I often do, but there's still a container that's very clearly described and was researched. So it had to be pretty clear. But the other thing that informs all this for me is that when I was younger, I was part of an improvisational dance and music troupe that was actually co-led by a professor of mine in college who taught my very first freshman seminar on Buddhism, which was called Emptiness. I didn't know what was ahead of me, but there you have it. And this form of radical improvisation that we did. So we would start someplace and then not know where we would go. And the only form was that we had to have a beginning and an end and interact with each other. If there were two dancers, it was a duet. If there were three, it was a trio, etc. So this same kind of responsiveness to the moment was something I used in my mindfulness teaching and still use in my Zen teaching. That there's a form, but it's not a rigidly adhered to form. So that means that everything that arises is the teaching. So when somebody says, "I don't want to bow," that's stupid. Then that's the teaching that's arising in this moment. Let's be present with your dislike of this. And we talked years ago, we were talking about how we did mindful inquiry, the group discussions, which I brought from MBSR into Zen and our Sangha anyway. And that same freewheeling feeling of let's see where we go, let's see where we go, let's see where we go. That feels like part of the Venn diagram overlap to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that improvisational quality and the freshness, very much part of Zen. And I think of the Dharma altogether, but in unique ways in Zen. And I'm wondering if you would agree with this. I think even things like improvisational dance, if people have initially had some more disciplined training in forms of dance, then their improvisational dance is going to have a different quality than people without that training just getting up and kind of doing whatever they're going to do. And I think similarly, in some ways, the ability in Zen or other contemplative traditions to be on the spot and then to express something that is a natural innate expression of wisdom and a nowness and freshness, that's enhanced by the training in the forms.
Yes, I agree.
That relationship.
I agree. Although I found when I was training people to do improvisational music and dance, people who were very thoroughly trained in classical dance or classical music had a much harder time breaking out of the form. So it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, right.
And and I think Zen sometimes has a little bit of a misunderstood quality that it's all about freewheeling. You read the stories of the old masters and they're just seem to be doing whatever they want to do, but it's not really like that. That freewheeling improvisation is based on decades usually of training in the forms again, and also in the understanding, I think training in the view, right? To have a clear view of what the Buddha was teaching, how that manifests in the different kinds of Buddhism there are, but because my expertise, if you can call it that, well, my familiarity is in Zen. I think that it takes a long time for people to align with the viewpoint that allows that kind of freedom. And if people are doing it because they're in their mind saying, I should be improvisational or I should be free, not so satisfying, not so clear.
Yeah, I've actually used that example many times. And some other types of training work I do, I sometimes use expressions like designing your life. And some people, I don't want to design my life. I just want to flow with things as they are, like a Zen adept, just freewheeling Zen adept out there flowing. I eat when I'm hungry and and so forth, sleep when I'm tired. I said, that's all good and wonderful if you actually are a Zen adept. But otherwise, that's probably just going to lead us into leading a very reactive life based on our conditioning.
Right. And a kind of foolish life. I always remember that when I was trying to be wild and free in my early days of Zen, and always kind of going off base, I had an interview with my teacher, the formal practice interviews, we call them doksan, going alone to see the teacher. And the way an interview ended was, as many of the people listening to this will know, that the teacher bows to you and then rings a bell. And he challenged me in some respect to say, just show me your freedom. I think that was the question. And so I reached forward and rang the bell, and he laughed and he said, the interview's over, get out of here. And I thought, oh no, I misused a form in my attempt to show off. So it's kind of like that, the deeper the understanding of these forms, they can still be misused. I've seen that happen a lot. Misused in the sense of moving away from clarity and balance. But also, there's a freedom to play once the training has allowed that understanding to develop in a person. And I just love to work with people like that myself now.
Yeah. And just to complete the loop on this connection with them, your background in MBSR and Zen, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, John Kabat-Zinn actually began with Zen in his own personal practice.
Did.
And, then MBSR seems like it largely conflated with and aligned with the Vipassana world, the insight meditation world. And I think maybe he felt that lent itself more to a secular tradition of hospital-based programs he was trying to develop. But his background was in Zen. And then with Saki Santarelli, his very strong background, and to this day, I believe, is a Sufi practice. I was, and this points to the beautiful cross-fertilization in this summit that we're hoping for, to see the depth, but also the connections. I was at a Sufi zikr just a few weeks back on a street retreat in New York City with Sheikh Fariha, and the second time I'd been to their place, and the whole thing was such a beautiful expression of just moved us into such a deep embodied expression of non-duality. And this time we actually had the text. Other times I've been there, we didn't. This time we had the text, and they're in Arabic and English, and they go back and forth, and they're chanting Arabic and English, and you could read along. And these were profound teachings on non-duality. I mean, there was some, theistic language there. They use the God language. Obviously, nothing wrong with that, but obviously in a way that was expressing profound non-dual spirituality. So, yeah.
And that was part of my training in mindfulness, was learning so much from Saki about that very thing that you're pointing to. And also, the fact that John started out in Zen, there's a wonderful paper, I think it's by a Finnish researcher, who found all the examples in the MBSR curriculum that were related to Zen, and all of the things John has said and written that are very Zen oriented. I can get you the name of that paper later, but I loved seeing it because I knew that already. That's one of the reasons I connected to him so deeply in my own heart. Is it felt familiar. The great thing about Zen and the great thing about Vipassana, which are different, I'm thinking of American Vipassana, right, is that, but maybe all Southeast Asian practices are orderly. They start with this, and then they move to that, and then and it's kind of comforting to people who want a curriculum, you might say. So it's very clear. And Zen, and now that I'm a Zen teacher, I see this more clearly myself. Zen is responding to a student's needs, and it's not sequential in the way that MBSR programs and some Theravada teachings are, or even Tibetan teachings, I think. So the non-sequential aspect of it was very hard to replicate and study. And I was able to train in Vipassana myself just to see what was going on. And it's really great to know about the 4 thises and the 7 that's and how it all works out.
Absolutely.
So, that I think that's my mind read on why John based the program really on some of the teachings around mindfulness and Vipassana.
Mm. Well, let's explore the actual meditation. This is the art of meditation summit, and I do want to explore koan practice with you and how you interweave koan practice with the students you teach and train. But in general, Zen is well known for the shikantaza practice, sometimes translated just sitting, and seems to point to a fairly formless approach to practice. And then, of course, in sort of maybe basic Zen meditation training, there's a lot of sort of more close placement techniques and breath counting, and I remember during my years in prison and practicing and teaching in prison, we had a video for our Dharma group there by John Daidalori Roshi, in which he talks about the importance of using breath counting and other practices like that to deepen the power of our focus, the power of our concentration. I think the Japanese word he used was joriki, the power of mind, and that is the basis for the ability to do perhaps more formless kinds of practices. So I think that's a general issue across meditation traditions, is this balance between, in Tibetan Buddhism, we talk about shamatha, which is more the stabilizing, calm abiding, and often is about an object of mindfulness, maybe the body, the breath that you keep coming back to and train the mind to deepen and stabilize. And then there's the more insight practices, Vipassana in Sanskrit in the Tibetan tradition, Vipassana in the Theravadan tradition, which are grounded more in insight. And then there's the whole world of more formless practices of just having awareness itself perhaps be the object in Shikantaza, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, these kinds. So there's this whole landscape. And I wonder if you could talk about, in your tradition and the way you teach Zen, this balance of training the mind to stabilize, and then maybe the ability to do some of these other practices, including koans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before I mention how it is in Zen, I just want to say how it was built into the MBSR curriculum, this same kind of idea of the training of stabilizing the mind and then open awareness. We called it choiceless awareness after Krishnamurti's term.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I remember people in the Buddhist world that I knew, when they found out about the curriculum, which starts with orienting to the body and the breath, and which is what we do in Zen as well. But then within a couple of weeks of practice, novices coming to this practice, they were instructed in choiceless awareness. And I remember people being horrified. You need to do this for years and years and years. And what I kept finding was that there were always a few people in a mindfulness class who naturally gravitated to a kind of shikantaza practice, a kind of just sitting practice. It was rare, though, but those people just, and then I started to find that with my Zen students too, that some people had kind of done the work outside of the training.
Mm-hmm.
They were already people who were very grounded physically, very grounded to the presence of the body, and that then could open in that way, because I do see it as a concentration and an openness practice, these two.
Mm-hmm.
With my students now, what I find, which is interesting, is that many of them want to skip over the body part and just get to the shikantaza or to koan practice without having that base. So sometimes, no matter how long somebody's been practicing Zen, even practicing Zen with me or my fellow teachers in Boundless Way, we have to start them all over again at the body. There's a wonderful line from Shito, who's one of our Zen ancestors in the 9th century. And maybe it was earlier than that, I think 8th century. And he says, don't separate from this skin bag here and now. A lovely line. And the skin bag being, of course, this body. So that grounding in posture, that's another important thing that's very emphasized in Zen. Feeling that your spine's in alignment, your buttocks are back, belly forward. If you're sitting in a chair, feet flat, if you're sitting on a cushion on the floor or a kneeling bench, that you have 3 points of contact, and then this a dignified arising from the base of the spine. That is the thing we emphasize over and over and over and over again. Just that. And that seems to, and people just have a hard time with that, especially people born and raised in the United States, I find, more than anywhere else. What I also find, this is something some of my Zen teacher friends and I talk about, is that people who have been trained in the martial arts, any kind of martial art, take to this very quickly, don't need much training in body practice. They already know how to be present in their bodies. So we teach that, we emphasize that a lot. Then there's that breath practice. Now in MBSR, there was, and in many other Buddhist traditions, there's many ways of doing breath practice. The kind that I feel leads to the depths that you're talking about is mindfulness of the breath in the hara, or the dandian, the lower part of the abdominal region. And my daughter is a vocal teacher, a voice teacher, and she patiently explained to me at one point that there's really no breath in the abdomen. There's muscles there that are responding to the diaphragm, but you can't really breathe into your belly, which that was the way I taught it for years, until now that she's middle-aged, she can tell me things as an expert herself in something else. But so the instruction really is to feel that little place. It's really the center of the body between the navel and the top of the pubic bone, where muscles are moving, and they're moving involuntarily. So unlike in a yoga pranayama practice, we would emphasize breath in different places, at the nostrils, in the lungs, of course, in the ribs, moving in and out. But this little moment, this little place where we can feel a subtle movement that we're not in control of, that we can rely on as something that's happening no matter what condition we're in, even when we're having problems with our breathing, which is very common these days, that there's a reliable center of attention that really can be returned to in any moment. So this is, then we spread that out to to all the 6 senses. Really, the 6th one, as many of you probably know, is the mind, the thinking organ. So this being present to everything, and you can do focused meditation on any of those 6 sense objects. It's hard with the thinking mind, but it's possible to do it. Just seeing thoughts as thoughts, we say, which is part of the Theravadan training, again, part of traditional Southeast Asian Buddhism. So when that is tasted, when everything is available, when we see that there's thinking, there's sensations, there's the emotions, which are really part of thinking, and all of these bodily sensations, there comes a time that I notice often with Zen students that they naturally open. I don't have to instruct them in how to do shikantaza. They begin to see the arising of various phenomena, and in that arising, that without chasing after anything, there is some way to be more and more open and present, and that I've seen naturally leads to a non-dual experience, not comparing, contrasting good, bad, better, worse, but now this, now this, now this. And that's the settling in that I find is really important for anybody doing further practices. And because I've been trained in koan practice, which is just a delightful way of testing the insights that people get from breath, body, and open awareness practice. The way the koans develop, they attend to different kinds of experiences people can have. The ones that people aren't having for probably historical, biographical reasons can be opened up through certain koan practice, and others can be affirmed. So it's fun to work. I've never worked with anybody who goes down the same path of training in Zen. So that goes back to the improvisational quality. I have to be, it's like dancing with somebody. I have to be, I have to get the person somehow, and they have to get me, and then we connect, and then they'll start to expand what they think of as their understanding until it's in harmony with the teachers of the past, I would say.
And I want to explore koan practice with you in a moment, but just to kind of complete this around. So I love the way you described connecting with that, perhaps even subtle anchor of that place where that involuntary movement is happening with the muscles and the breath there, and the dantian or the hara, and and then at some point it could naturally just fall away into what we would think of as shikantaza, or more formless practice, or choiceless awareness, or and in the way my own first teacher taught, he kind of taught a lot of different. Actually, from what I hear, I met him a couple of years after he first arrived in the U.S. When he was first here, he did give a lot of people, just immediately gave them these kind of choiceless awareness practices, and he felt they could do it. But over time, he realized he felt most of the students needed more training, and he developed some really profound integrations of shamatha and vipassana that kind of naturally led one into the other. But his emphasis was on, kind of establishing that really felt anchor, not a conceptual anchor, but a felt anchor. And then, being very patient and letting that fall away on its own, as it would or not, and being able to return to it whenever that was needed. But it's more of a natural process of moving from practices that have more form or more anchoring or more placement to practices that are more focused on meditating on space or awareness itself, or seeing into the nature and things like that. And so I think that's all wonderful. And of course, there are some students and some people from other training, or perhaps just the karma of their lives, whatever, they seem to be able to jump right into some of these more advanced practices. But part of with our society today, I think there's a lot of impatience and a lot of superficiality, and just a digital world and a world of apps, and I think the idea of even apprenticing about anything anymore is anathema. It's like. And so and just the whole idea of training and mastery, we're in a kind of world of, in many ways, of superficiality, and a wonderful thing that so much is available, but I think it also tends us to move us towards superficiality and staying on the surface. And so I think there can be a lot of us who will want to gravitate towards what we think or we've heard is a more advanced practice, and really not deepen because we haven't done the foundational training. So I wonder if you could maybe speak a little bit more of that just before we move on to talking about koan practice.
No, I agree with you completely. I see it all the time. And I saw it in myself when I was younger. I remember being at the library one day and finding on a bottom shelf a book of answers to Zen koans. And I thought, great, this is it. And I took it out, and a lot of the answers to the koans, turns out this was based on notes somebody had taken of their training with their Japanese teacher and translated into English, were in response to the question. It said, the monk stands up. So I tried that with my first teacher, and I remember him saying, right answer, wrong koan. Like there was it's been in American culture, at least for so long, this quick fix, and here's a pill you can take, and here's an operation you can have, and so I think, of course, it applies to our training in mindfulness and Buddhism. It couldn't help but do that, and I think one of the biggest dangers for me, and I use the word danger on purpose because I think it can distract people from the main core of the practice, which is to awaken to reality in this lifetime right now, is that they think they're doing shikantaza practice, but they're basically just sitting around and thinking about things, even thinking about Buddhism, or thinking about, the movie they saw last night, or what they're going to have for dinner. And they think that's shikantaza because, it's just thoughts. But Wu Men, the great 13th century Chinese teacher who put a set of koans together that we still study, he talks about not going down the mind road. And I think many people who practice shikantaza go through the mind road. When I first started teaching, I inherited some students from my second teacher who had been training with other people. And all of the ones who would come in and say, my practice is shikantaza, I started to ask them, tell me what that is for you. And I would say some very high percentage of people said, I'm just sitting around and letting my mind wander, which for me, that's a small instance of shikantaza. Sometimes mind wandering is what's arising, but it's not the whole thing from the beginning bell to the ending bell. So to start to train people again to be more embodied in their shikantaza practice, some people just couldn't make that transition. They'd already gone too far. And I think meditation is sitting and thinking about things. So for those folks who wanted to stay in my trainings anyway, breath and body practice became their core. And now a lot of people come in. When we do individual meetings, the form is bow, say your name, and what your practice is. I often have to train people to understand what that means. What's your practice? Now people say, my practice is breath and body practice. And sometimes they'll say shikantaza, then I'll ask them what they mean by that. And a very small number really are, in my view, practicing shikantaza. But that's okay, because the people who are open to receiving instruction, those years of being lost in thoughts are not wasted. And they know what I'm talking about. And it's great. Then they start coming back with experiences of, oh, I actually felt present yesterday. Oh, what was that like? And it almost always has to do with being present in the body. Yeah, I think our whole educational system also has grabbed people away from the body, into the mind. And I think the internet, the miracle of the internet is great. And also there's a sadness I have when I'm talking with younger students. Their whole life is on a two-dimensional screen. And it's to be three-dimensional, to be embodied, as I said, is just revelatory to some of those younger folks. And they're quick studies too, because this is what they've been longing for all their lives, and that they lost somehow from once they went to kindergarten. They got, no, sit still. We say to sit still in Zen, but we don't mean it like that. It's a dynamic stillness, right? It's not there's no rigidity in it. So I think modern Zen, from what I know about the way I teach, the way we teach in Boundless Way, and some of my colleagues, is a healing presence in this two-dimensional screen world to bring people back into really being fully present in the senses, alive in the sensory world.
Yeah, I think this is so important. Now, we do live in a relatively disembodied culture in the West. I have a friend that says that the brain has been, the body has been relegated to being nothing but a brain taxi, just something to carry this, super computer around that's on our shoulders. And personally, I've evolved over the years, both in my practice and a deeply embodied approach to practice. And actually, I think you can take anything as the object of mindfulness awareness. As you said, you can work with thoughts. They're pretty sticky. You need a stable awareness to do that, but you can work with all the sensorium. But the body is maybe the most accessible, tangible anchoring. And I even think some things we know from current neuroscience support that it's a good vehicle into the more we synchronize body and mind, the more the mind will naturally quiet down. We don't have to struggle with thoughts so much. And really, the deeper we go into body, we're going from the maybe more obvious, tangible, gross level sensation into subtler and subtler and subtler. We're really into the whole body-mind spectrum anyway, and we're going from the form to the formless, even through the body.
Absolutely.
And the one thing I love also about traditional Zen practice and many Western Zen centers is not just you have both the cushion practice on the cushion, and whatever form that takes as we're discussing, but you also have work practice. And
right.
And physical practice, working, and whether you're helping clean up the zendo, or you're outside doing gardening, or you're working, helping prepare meals in the kitchen. But there's there's a natural, practical physicality to Zen. It seems like, and really grounding ourselves in the everyday nitty gritty of taking care of life and taking care of ourselves and each other.
Oh, I completely agree. That is one of the delights of Zen practice for me. And, since we came back together after the pandemic's not really over, but it's loosened up quite a bit. And so we're having in-person retreats again. Baizhang, a teacher, an old Zen teacher from a long time ago, said a day without work is a day without eating. And to really feel that in the group of people who gather together, we're doing this together. Everyone is an important part. I was just telling my 94-year-old mother-in-law who's visiting us about these retreats, and that we have honorific names for all the jobs. So the person who takes out the trash is the trash master, and the person who makes the coffee is the coffee master. And that, the idea is that everyone is a teacher in their physical role of taking care of everybody else. And the teachers do that by giving talks and meeting with students, but sometimes we have to pitch in too. And there's something really important about that. And some people just hate it. They thought they were coming for a spa vacation. I had somebody complaining to me, "You have to work here. Why do you have to work? I just want to come and meditate." Well, so this is meditation. This is a form of meditation. Feeling the trash going into the bag and the smell of it, and putting it up and putting it in the garage for the trash person to take. It's all moment after moment attention is required. And yeah, I love that about Zen.
It's extraordinary, wonderful. Well, let's talk a bit about koan practice. So to an outsider, koan practice, I mean, you can read books about it, and there's even books, as you said, that offer the answer to koans, which is kind of antithetical, but it seems pretty enigmatic to people. What is this idea of these Zen riddles, and you some focus on them, and somehow it'll facilitate some illumination in the mind or some insight or something. And it happens in the very secret cloistered setting of Dokusan, with the meeting between the teacher and the student in a private, and the whole thing seems very kind of enigmatic and so forth. So I wonder, I don't necessarily want you to demystify koan practice, but a little mysticism never hurts. But if you could give us some sense of what it's about and how you work with it with your students.
Thanks for that question and the way you framed it too, because there is an aura of mystery around koans. What is the sound of one hand clapping? People hear that and they go, what is that? I don't understand. This is crazy Zen stuff. And just like what we were talking about a few moments ago about the orderly nature of introducing people to practice, really starting with posture, breath, and body, and the other senses, and then maybe open awareness. There's a similar training in Zen practice and there's 3 different traditional ways of studying koans. In Boundless Way, we use them all. The original way, as I understand it, was that there would be publicly stories from the masters from hundreds of years earlier. So koan practice, as we know it, didn't really start until I think about the 11th, 12th century in China, and then spread to Japan eventually, and Korea, and Vietnam. Those are the main countries, I guess. So the teacher would present a koan, comment on it, and then invite people to come forward and comment on it. And they'd engage in this Dharma dialogue, we call it now. It used to be called Dharma combat. So it was always, in fact, the word koan means a public case, a public example, like case law in law, something that happened that seems a little bit mysterious, as you said, and then it's opened up by the group and the teacher leading the group. So we still do that in Boundless Way. We still have, and many Zen teachers I know, in fact, even in the Soto tradition, do this. They explicate a koan and then invite questions. And that's the public thing. I think the private Dokusan or Sanzen, it's sometimes called, depending on your tradition, the one-on-one practice became, that really didn't take off for another few centuries, and especially in Japan, it was a very big deal. So then you would meet with a teacher, and the teacher would assign you your own personal koan, which is a common practice in many spiritual traditions to get personal instruction like that, and it's yours. And then lead you through bigger and bigger understanding. So the basic koans are sometimes called breakthrough koans, and they're stories usually, or phrases that are given to students to break through to some understanding of the way things are, similar to shikantaza practice when it's done, in my view, authentically. You don't have to work that hard. You just have to be present to this unfolding, which is kind of always there, your birthright, you might say. So with a teacher who knows how to play with those traditional teachings and has been trained herself or himself or theirself, then people can flower in their understanding of koans, just like they flower in their spacious awareness. So the very first koans, the breakthrough koans, are given to people. They're mysterious at first. We play with them a little bit, and then we often let them drop into a breath practice or a shikantaza practice. So I'll give you an example of the one we mostly use. But the sound of the single hand is one of them, by the way. And it's not two hands clapping. The original Japanese is, the sound of two hands, what's the sound of one hand? So we say, what is the sound of the single hand? But the one we mostly use is the koan mu, which is a very mysterious koan unless you understand some of the background of it. Famous teacher, famous in his time, like the Dalai Lama's famous now. A student approaches with a question, a heartfelt question. And the student's question is about the nature of being a Buddha, being a person who's awake. Because the teaching in the Mahayana is that the great vehicle, which is part of Zen and Tibetan Buddhism, is that everyone is already awake. But what the practices do is they reveal that awakened awareness to us. So the student comes forward and says, does even a dog have this awakened nature, this nature of being a Buddha? And so first we ask people, what is he really asking? Be like asking, so is the sky blue? Yeah. The answer to that question is yes. Yes, dogs, rocks, you, me, everything has this awakened nature. But the teacher, whose name was Zhao Zhou in Chinese, says no. He says a word in Chinese, wu, which is a word that a prefix often that goes before another word to negate it. So not, non, no. And then we ask people when they first start out to be that student and feel what he must have been asking. And I get beautiful answers from people about that. He doesn't believe in himself. He doesn't believe that it's possible. He's heard these teachings, but it's just not. And there's no wrong answers. And then to enter the mind of the Zen master, why did he say no to that? And then once that happens, we kind of take that story and set it to one side and just take the word for no. Some people use the Chinese word wu. Some people use mu, which is the Japanese word, or even no or not or neti or nada, depending on their background. And then use that as what we call a wa do. And wa do is both a Chinese and a Japanese word that means the little kernel seed of something that will grow into the future plant. So the little seed is mu. That's the most common word that people use. And then, depending on what the student's main practice is, breath and body, shikantaza, we drop mu into that. So people will breathe mu in and breathe it out. Little bit, it's got a more of an inquiry than a mantra might have. So it's just this puzzling thing. It's almost like an irritant, like a piece of sand in a clamshell making a pearl. It's irritating. Mu on, but mu in, mu out. And then people who are doing shikantaza practice will also drop mu in. my teacher used to call it Shikan Mu, which I thought was very sweet. And so you just live with Mu. And Wu Men, the guy who wrote this koan down first as a part of a curriculum, used to say, carry it with you day and night. And so we carry it with us. And then when people come in for Doksan, they say, I'm Melissa, my practice is the breath, and I'm letting Mu ride on the breath. And then we might say, so tell me your insight into Mu these days. What are you noticing? And then little by little, something starts to open, and we see that people really get something, that really the world is full of the awakened heart. There's no avoiding it. When that starts to happen, it's an esoteric practice, because it's a hidden practice of questions. We call them checking questions. And just, tell me this about Mu, tell me that about Mu. And so it's like you referred to an apprenticeship before. It's an apprenticeship in how to understand koans. And it can take years and years and years. But sometimes people have these little breakthroughs. And then we have a whole set, once they've really broken through and have what I would call an awakening experience, then we have a whole bunch of other koans called the miscellaneous koans. Every Zen teacher I know has a different set of them. And they're designed to help you learn the language of koans. How do you answer them? How do you demonstrate them? Almost always a physical demonstration is required. Then we start going into all these classical texts, like the Gateless Gate, the Blue Cliff Record, etc. And then we study the precepts as koans. That's the last training. So it's a very thorough training, and it takes really a lifetime for most people. People who move through a little more rapidly might be asked to teach, and then there's another training for how to teach Zen. That's just given to a handful of people, but it's all kind of the same. How do you meet what's happening in that present moment? So I think you can hear my excitement about this particular way of teaching. I just love meeting with people in this field where the ordinary ways of understanding things are not available. So you're thrown back on really not knowing what's going on, and people who are well educated want to know stuff. We all want to know what's going on, and think we understand. This is about practicing with the authentic not understanding. Because I came into this world thinking, what is going on? I don't get it. In Korean Zen, I've been told that there are two main koans. What is this? And who am I? And I personally worked with Who Am I for many, many years. Very wonderful opening koan. So yeah, so it can seem mysterious when you hear all these weird stories. The third way that we work with koans, I don't want to lose track of that, in Boundless Way, something I learned from my teacher's teacher, John Tarrant, who has been running what he calls koan salons for many years. What that is it's a little bit of a hearkening back to the Sung Dynasty, where people would work together on koans. The teacher presents a koan and just says it over and over and over again, sometimes a very advanced koan. And people just freely share their insights into it, or their puzzlements. They're like, when he said this, I didn't know what that meant. And the group itself comes to a spacious understanding of these mysterious things. So we're still doing that. We changed the name to Koan Cafe, because we didn't want people to be confused that they're going to a hair salon or something like that. This is like the old European understanding of salons. So we're still doing that. We do that once a month. I got to train with John Tarrant. He trains teachers in how to teach koan salons. And it's a wonderful process of inquiring and improvisation, and really trusting that all the people who have gathered together already know everything they need to know, but they don't know that they know it. So there's an eliciting of understanding and insight.
That's beautiful. As I was listening to you, Roshi, there was First you were describing it in the Mahayana view, which includes Zen and Tibetan Buddhism, and yeah, it has influenced, I think, the Theravada tradition a lot. There's this idea that we're already awake, and the innate wholeness, the innate goodness, that there isn't anything fundamentally wrong with us. We're not like missing anything, and which is really important because Buddhism can have a deconstructive quality, but we're deconstructing down into that ground of innate goodness and not just into some kind of nihilism. And
Yeah.
and then when you're talking about working with the koans, so there's that innate goodness, innate wholeness, innate wisdom already awake, but there's this sparky quality of intelligence I could hear happening, the prajna quality, to use
Yes,
the term,
definitely.
and
Definitely.
operating at the individual level, perhaps when, being in that place of not knowing, and and I think you love working with it, to be in that space with others. You're in that, the sparks are happening,
Hmm.
and then more collective intelligence, the collective prajna, and what are, I guess, called the koan cafes that John Tarrant teaches, trains people to do it. That collective intelligence, that sparking.
Hmm.
Um, I remember when my teacher founded Naropa University, he talked about, bringing intellect and intuition together, and when east meets west, the sparks will fly, and it's that quality of
Yeah.
our innate intelligence, allowing it to really bubble up. And yeah.
Well, there's another I love the way you just described all that. I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. And in addition to this innate prajna, I think that's a
Mhm.
great way of talking about it. There's also the human structure of the heart and the brain,
Mm.
which we call the three poisons, right?
Mhm.
That really innately we are greedy, angry, ignorant animals. And all you have to do to understand that, well, is to read the news, but also to see a newborn baby. I just had the blessing of a granddaughter 6 weeks ago. We hang out with her a lot, and there's not a lot to do. She's just spreading her prajna compassion. It's beautiful, but she is an animal, and she is greedy, and she gets angry if she doesn't get what she wants, and she's ignorant bliss a lot of the times, spends a lot of time sleeping. So part of the training for me is also accepting that greed, anger, and ignorance are not problems unless they're approached in a very narrow way,
Mhm.
right? And so when they're approached in a more spacious way, I actually learned this from a student of Trungpa Rinpoche, and I love this teaching, and so you probably already know it, is that there are no antidotes to these poisons, but poisons, like any medicine, when they're used properly, are healing. So, for example, when we're angry, if we allow the anger to be present without acting on it, with this combination of anger and spaciousness, it turns into wisdom, clarity. The bodhisattva of wisdom, Manjushri, carries a sword that cuts through delusion. That's a strong, violent act to cut through delusion. So it's like one little tiny anger. No, I'm not angry. I'm going to be calm because I'm a Buddhist and peaceful. Instead, just opening to the energy of that. You've referenced Jiriki earlier, and I think Jiriki arises as this very strong life force.
Mhm.
Ki is the same word as chi,
Mhm.
uh, it's just like you don't have to force yourself to breathe. There's a natural opening to wisdom, and with greed, when you're in that same space, turns into compassion, because the I want mind suddenly is the connecting heart mind. And then ignorance itself transforms into equanimity. So it's like almost anger and wisdom are the same thing, but transformed by these practices that we've been talking about. And for me, that's the biggest hope for the world right now,
Mm.
is that instead of saying, you people who do that, you're not like me, but to say, oh, yeah, I have that division in my own heart, right? And this is how I react to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very much represented in the deep understanding of the five Buddha family mandala of these energies,
Yes,
and
yes, yes.
the Maitri work that was taken kind of into psychological healing. And then my Zen teacher, Bernie Glassman, took that 5 energy model into the world as models for how to work with the world and so forth. But it is seeing that in the midst of any of these potentially troublesome or problematic mind states is wisdom.
Yes, exactly. Well, and even in the depictions in Tibetan Buddhism of the 6 realms of existence,
Mm-hmm.
there's always a little Buddha in every
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
realm,
exactly.
wherever you are. And that's part of, we also tell people in our Sangha, you're bodhisattvas. You actually are wisdom beings, and you need to take responsibility for
Yeah.
your own practice so that you can contagiously spread it to anybody you happen to be with.
Wonderful. How can people find out more about your work and your Zen Center and programs you offer?
Well, it's pretty easy. Our main website is boundlessway, one word, .org. And when you go to that, you'll see we have a main temple in Worcester, Mass.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to know how to pronounce Worcester. Very
Mm-hmm.
important. And we also have other sitting groups around the United States and overseas. And so there's on the main page, there's a link to the schedule for all of our practices. We have, I think it's about 16 practice periods a week. Some all times of the day. Some of them are just on Zoom. Some of them are in person. There's 1 or 2 that are in person, and some of them are a hybrid. So they're both in person and on Zoom. And there are links. You just can connect whenever you want to any of those places. There's also teachings, links to our podcast, where my husband, David Reineck, Roshi, and I have talks that we give. We give a couple of talks a week, and our senior students and teachers in training also give talks. We don't lead all the groups. We have senior students and teachers in training leading some of the groups. And yeah, just explore the website. It's still in process because we just recently merged a whole bunch of separate practice groups into one big organization called Boundless Way Zen Temple. So enjoy, lots of things to explore.
What a wonderful offering, and to make to practice that available. Yeah. Really,
there's no charge for any of this. We do ask for donations for things. And you can also become a member if you're a regular and you think this is for me, I want to study. You can also become personal students of David or me or a couple of other teachers in training, and come to retreats. We have lots of retreats, and to our next koan cafe, which happens once a month on a Saturday. And that's a lot of fun. So yeah, everything's very open. We love beginners. We love people with lots of practice in other forms of meditation, other forms of Zen. And people do come and explore.
Wonderful, wonderful. And such an incredible offering. And you've been such a dedicated teacher for so long, making the Dharma available in this incredibly generous and open way. So thank you so much for the work you do. And thank you so much for being part of our summit.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And back to you too. Thank you for everything you do to make this available to all kinds of people. How important for our life right now in this burning world. Yeah.
Thank you. Be well.
Thank you. You too.